Okay, in this lesson, we're going to just look at this double exposure assignment, what we've been doing. What you might want to just investigate and play around with, so some of the things we're going to be looking at is how to understand and deal with masking, so layer masking. You can see the black and white layers here, as well as how to do some really refined selections of hair. So you can see on Justin Bieber hair, his hair here, his hair has been selected really well and really definitely. And then you can see on this assignment, you've got Justin Bieber, plus a Toronto skyline, plus a highway. So I guess this is a triple exposure. Let's jump straight into it. So you can create this however you'd like to, and just use lots of images. So I'm going to make a new assignment. It is going to be 10.5 inches by 5.5 inches, and we would like it to be a resolution of 300 pixels per inch. Just so it's incredibly high resolution, that'll be good. And we want to add our guides first. So if you go to View, New Guide, you can add your vertical guides at 0.25 and 10.25, and then you can add your horizontal guides at 0.25 and 5.25. So your assignment should exist within that, okay? So the first thing that I'm going to mention is you should, as you're searching for images and profiles, or you can take a picture of yourself, just make sure that your tools are set to larger than 4 megapixels, okay? So whether it's a profile or whatever it happens to be, you also want to ensure that the image of the profile has a high level, a decent level of contrast with the background. Otherwise, the selection is going to be quite difficult. So I'm going to bring Justin Bieber onto my assignment here and show you how to select him in a pretty good way. So here he is. You can move him where you like to. So I think I'm going to place him right there. Looks pretty good. I'll move him over a touch. And then use a selection tool of some sort. So I'm going to use, and you might have to use different tools than I will, but the idea here is with whatever profile you have, you need to select it. Okay, so you can see here's Justin Bieber, but my selection at the moment isn't done perfectly well because there's a whole bunch of hairs up here that I haven't selected, and some hairs here that are missed. So I'm actually going to show you a new tool. So if you've done a decent selection but you missed some hairs, what you can do is click on the button called Select and Mask for your tool, and you'll get a new menu kind of pop up. So this currently is my selection at the moment, and you can see there's lots of hair that's missing up here, etc. If you find you can't zoom in like I can't right now, a really quick way to kind of fix that is just click on View, and on any of these, for some reason after that it'll let you zoom in and out. So if you want to do some of that, okay? Now over here you've got a transparency slider. You can't see the number 100 here right now, but this slider allows you to see what your actual selection is. So if it's at 100%, that's your actual selection. If you reduce it, you can see through to what your original image was. So if you want to pick up those hairs, you want to see that they're there, I'm just going to go to a transparency of roughly 40%. And to pick those up, you can use the tool in the Select and Mask called the Refine Edge Brush tool, and just kind of hover over these guys. And what you're going to notice is if I up my transparency, which is my actual selection, so transparency here to 100, those hairs now exist on that selection, which is kind of cool. You can notice the same thing with some of his chin hairs. So his chin hairs right now are okay, decently selected, but you'll notice that if I drop the transparency to the original, there's way more hair definition here. So if you'd like to, you can use your Refine Edge Brush tool on any edges where there's some pretty detailed pieces of selection, okay? Maybe on the back of his head here there might be as well. So I can pick some of those up. But that's how to do kind of a selection with refined edges. If I go up to 100% now, and I zoom out, I should be able to see I've got a pretty good selection here now compared to what I had previously, so I can hit OK. Okay, so there we go. I've got a decent selection of Justin Bieber, although it looks like part of his hair is missing again, so I'm just going to add that back. There we go. And if I click on the Add Layer Mask, so you've got that selection. So you've got your clipping mask. So we're going to be dealing with that a whole bunch here. I'll be talking pretty quickly, and this kind of comes down to some understanding of how clipping masks work, and you can just practice and ask questions and all that sort of stuff. So you generally, with whatever you'd like to expose on there, are just going to drag it straight on top So if it's Toronto or whatever it happens to be, you'll drag that as an extra layer straight on top. To save time, what I've already done is in a different document, so don't worry about these next few steps, but there's a few things you'll need to focus on. On a different document, I've already done a decent job of selecting Toronto. It took a little while. I used the magnetic lasso tool, and as just a reminder, if you ever need to refine your selection, you can hold down Shift to add to your selection and use any of the selection tools. I'm using the polygonal lasso tool because these are straight edges on these buildings. So you can kind of see I've done a decent job of selecting this Toronto skyline. Okay, so once you've got it selected, and it can be on its own document, what you'd like to do is create a clipping mask for that as well. So I'm going to do it a little bit different. Well, you'll eventually add the layer mask to it, but it'll already be in that document. So I'm going to add the layer mask here. Don't worry about the next step. I just need to drag it into my document. So you'll have your layer mask already in this document, and here is Toronto. So I want to expose this onto Justin Bieber, the back of his head. Lots of ways you can expose things. This one's going to be a little bit trickier because I want the actual image popping out of his head. I'm also going to rotate it a little bit here, but this is where you can get creative. So here's Justin Bieber. If you ever want to see where you're exposing it onto, you can lower the opacity of the layer just so you can kind of see through it and do whatever it is you'd like to do. So I'm going to expose, I'd say, just see here. There, we kind of want to expose it in that way on Justin Bieber's head, okay? So, next step's a little bit tricky. So if I would like to expose this onto his face, what I'm going to have to do is go into, so I already have the layer mask here on the city, but I want to add kind of the front part of his face. So what I'm going to do, or actually delete the part that isn't on the front part of his face, is I'm going to hold down Control and click on the Bieber layer mask here. So I see the shape of Bieber's face. The problem here is if I pull out the black tool, so I pull out the black paintbrush, and I start doing this, what it's actually going to do is erase the part on the inside of his face. Okay, and actually I should have gone here, but you can see I'm actually erasing Toronto inside. Okay, I actually want to erase Toronto on the outside of his face. So if you're doing this type of thing, what you want to do is actually select the inverse. So I held down Control and selected Bieber, and I'm going to go to select inverse. And I'm going to now pull up my black tool, and this should allow me to actually delete. Now I forgot one extra step that might impact me later on, so I'm going to back this up a little bit. What you might want to do before this is actually duplicate the layer with Justin Bieber, because we're going to play around with the mask a lot. So I'm going to right click, and I'm going to duplicate the layer, and we've got a duplicate right underneath here. So I'm going to undo, just going to not view that one, but that'll help me later on with some of the masking. So here I've got the layer mask for Toronto, and I'd like to delete the outside of his face. So I selected the Bieber layer mask, and I'm going to go to select inverse, and I'm going to erase the part that's on the outside and the front of his face. Okay, so that's kind of step number one for me in this particular case. Some of you won't have to do this part because you're doing something differently. So there we go. And I think what I'll do now with that layer, so if you press Control D, you'll deselect that layer mask, is I'm going to lower the opacity a tiny bit. But then what I can also do is if I want to see his face pop through a little bit more, is I could go, so the idea here is we want to erase or lower the layer mask, make a black layer mask on the Toronto selection. So if I go to this Toronto selection and I pull out a black brush, probably with a low opacity, that black will remove it from the selection so I can actually kind of see through to Justin Bieber's face. And I can do that in a variety of places. Another thing I'm noticing, so this is where you can kind of play around, is part of his body's popping through here. I actually want to erase the part of his body, so right here that's popping through. So if I select the city layer mask, I'm going to hold down Control. So there's my city layer mask, but I select the inverse because I want to erase the outside part of it. So I'm going to, and this is again pretty tricky layer masking, but I go to select the inverse, and I go to Justin Bieber now and pull up my black. It should erase, I'm going to up the opacity, it should erase that part. Okay, so we've got something pretty cool going on here. Okay, so I kind of have those selected. If you wanted to erase part of his ear, you didn't like his hair up here, you could imagine what you'd want to do. You'd want to be in the Justin Bieber layer mask, pull out black. You'd want to deselect the inverse, so I just press Control D. But big idea now is as long as I have my black brush, I'm going to lower my opacity. So if you look at his hair up here that's kind of covering, if I start clicking, his hair will start disappearing a little bit. Same thing with his ear. If I click on his ear, I can kind of make his ear disappear. So you can get as picky as you want to with this stuff as long as you understand layer mask. So he's kind of blending in really well. So that's kind of the idea so far. Last thing I want to do is expose the highway onto him. So I've got a highway image that I like to bring onto him. So that's this guy right here. So here's the highway. I'm going to do this one a little bit more simply. So I'm just going to drag it onto the top here for the time being. I think I want the highway. You can kind of see through it a little bit. I want the actual highway itself to kind of be going. You can see it's going to kind of be curving into, maybe I'll put it here, curving into his mouth a little bit. Okay, so if I want that to be superimposed just on the Justin Bieber part of the image, I can go back to the part that I copied. I'm going to hold down Control, select, whoops, just have to check mark here, select that as my layer mask, and then I'm going to go to the highway layer and add the layer mask. So there we go. So we've got that highway superimposed onto Justin Bieber, and this is where you can play with a whole bunch of things again. If you want to erase parts, you can. So I can go into that layer mask there, pull up my black brush. If I start clicking, I should be able to see through it a little bit. So I, at the moment now, have actually a triple exposure. You can also, on that highway layer, lower the opacity a bit if you want to see through it a bit. You can also see the blending's done a little bit poorly down here, so you might want to erase that part of the highway image. So you can imagine what you do in that case. You'd select the Toronto clipping mask and select the inverse. But again, these are all steps that are a little bit more advanced, but you might have fun playing around with. So I'm going to erase. So I pull up my black brush, and I should be able to erase that part of the image. So I've got my multi-layered double exposure. So there's that. A few things you might want to do is add a gradient background. So if you go to the background layer, you can pull out your gradient tool. You can choose up here whatever colors you'd like. So if you want certain colors, you can absolutely go for it. I already have pre-selected colors, but if you wanted to, just show you really quickly here. There we go. So there's my pre-selected colors, and if you drag a line, you can drag in any direction you want to, right? So you can kind of see the gradient there. I'm just going to drag maybe a diagonal line from one corner to the other. That looks pretty cool. And the last thing I want to do, actually a couple more things. I'm going to add an angle to this selection a little bit. You can see me do that in just a second. Then I'll show you some adjustments that you can make to this image if you'd like to, okay? So first of all, if I want to make this kind of an angle, I can actually pull up my polygonal lasso tool. Actually, yeah, my polygonal lasso tool. It's going to make a selection here. I kind of want to cut this off to look a little bit more fancy. So cut that off. And if I just, so that's a selection. If I go to all my layer masks and just paint that black, they'll all disappear. So if we go to this layer mask, there's a black brush, make the opacity 100. You see some part has been disappeared. I can go to the highway layer mask, erase the highway layer. I can also go to the Justin Bieber copy and I can erase that. So now it looks a little bit more funky as far as the angle goes. And then if you want to do any type of playing around with colors, etc., you can select the layer. And if you've got this little image here, that icon, it's a smart object. So what you can do in that case is go to Image, Adjustments, and choose any of these. So I'm just going to show you two. I kind of want mine to be a little bit warmer in color. So there's a color balance here. Again, these are all things you can play with any of these adjustments. I want to make it a little bit warmer, so I'm on the highway right now. I'm going to make it a little bit more yellow and a little bit more red, so it'll kind of orange it up a little bit. And I will also maybe do the same thing. I think I'll also lower the saturation on all of these. It'll make it look a little bit more black and white. Maybe I'll go to Bieber and kind of show you how that works. So here's Justin Bieber. You can go to Image, Adjustments. So if I go to the hue saturation and lower the saturation, you can see if I go all the way, Justin Bieber turns black and white. But I just want to kind of lower his saturation a little bit here just for something fun to do. I can also, if I want to, add an adjustment and a color balance. I'm going to make him a little bit more yellowy and reddy, so a little bit more orange. You can see his skin's a little bit more orange. And I'll do a similar thing to Toronto. Now with Toronto here, you can see it's not a smart object, so you might be able to convert it to a smart object in that case and do layer adjustments, or if it's not, the only thing you'll need to do instead of going to image adjustments, you have to go to layer and new adjustment layer, and you've got the same options here. Okay, so if it's not a smart object, you can do it that way as well. You just have to make sure that you click on the previous layer to create clipping mask at this place, and you've got the adjustments over here. So I'm going to lower the saturation on Toronto to just a little bit, maybe about that much, and then maybe I will also add an adjustment layer of color balance to Toronto. Again, making sure I click on that. If you've got a smart object, you can just go to image adjustments, but here Toronto is going to get a little bit more yellowy red. You can see it's kind of a neat triple exposure, a highway down here, Justin Bieber, as well as the Toronto skyline. So that's kind of what we're looking at for this assignment. Have some fun.